safety, and especially as it goes or pertains to transmitters safety. The second half will be about emergency action plans, because I can bet there are very few in this room that have an emergency action plan at their station. And that's a requirement by OSHA, which I know will make everybody happy. As he said, I've been in business for quite a few many years. I've learned from some of the best, and I'm still learning. And there isn't a day go by that I don't try and keep an open mind to try and learn something new. The fire and EMS thing, yes, I am still certified medic, so that will help with when we get a little bit deeper in here. But I do want to cover the safety issues with stations, especially as it pertains to the transmitter site safety issues. And then, like I said, the emergency action plan. A little bit of eye candy for some of us in the audience that like the older equipment. Yes, those guys working on that TV rig were wearing suits, and that's the way it was done many, many years ago. And there's a few of us that can remember transmitters looking like this, an RCA where the meters were actually up and working. It's a little weird. That's a picture of a Klystron out of a TTU-30 or a TTU-60 RCA transmitter. The reason I've got that up there is I'm just showing the progression of how TV's gone, because the voltages and the currents have gotten very dangerous, such as this particular one, when I worked at Wiz down in Zanesville, ran 17,600 volts of DC at like 4.5 amps. Definitely enough to ruin your day. AM, has gone solid state from the good old days of the little 250 there. Just showing you, old and new. The old one stood about yay haul. The new one fits in a 19-inch rack. But it's different concerns, because instead of high voltage and lower current, now you've got lower voltage but higher current. So it's still an issue. And then FMs today are about this size. I remember when I first started actually understanding transmitters, an FM transmitter that size would maybe be a 10 kilowatt transmitter. And there's a 40 kilowatt transmitter that also do digital. So, we've come to quite the change. And then that's the thing that none of us ever like to see. And that's the thing that starts to ruin your day right there, is when the transmitter's down, you've got sales, you've got the GM, you've got everybody yelling at you, you got to do something, you got to do something. At the same time, you're sitting there going, I'm so tired, I've been up for 2 days straight working on all this other stuff, and now my transmitter's off. That is some of the dangers that I'm talking about. In front of most transmitter manuals, you'll see a statement that reads something like this. Currents and voltages in the equipment are dangerous. Personnel at all times observe safety warnings, instructions, regulations. It's not a suggestion, it's not a page just to turn by in the manual when you're looking for what the parts you're looking for. You need to adhere to this, because otherwise you're not here to talk to us tomorrow about it. Some of the classic things to look for in transmitters, there's still some that's using oil-filled capacitors. Oil-filled capacitors are dangerous in a couple of ways. Number one, the oil that's in them. Number two, just the fact that they can recharge off of static in the air. And I have seen this happen on a TV transmitter where somebody was pointing with a grounding stick at something, and it arced over. The transmitter had been off for like 12 hours, but a lot of the bleeder resistors had gone bad, and the capacitor had recharged, and it sparked across. Made a very big fireball. Electrolytic caps, we've all seen these where they've either swollen or they're disformed or they're discolored, whatever, which leads into hot components. If something's hot, wait for it to cool down before you're trying to handle it, before you're trying to change out the part, before you're trying to remove it, to inspect it further. Let it cool down first. Otherwise, you can and will get burned. Another thing to watch out for is the older engineers. We've gone to solid state now. So there's plastics and things. There's Teflons, which turns to a deadly powder, things like this when they overheat. The older transmitters, of course, the voltages, the currents, things like that. So there's just as many dangers with the solid state, just that are a different kind. Things to do. Don't work alone, especially for radio stations. If you have to, have a DJ in the next room, have somebody in the next room, the secretary, it doesn't matter. Somebody that can look in on you and make sure that you're staying alive, so you're staying safe. Watch out for fatigue. That should be a chuckle for all of us. A lot of times we're working on a transmitter, we're fatigued. But you need to watch, and when it gets to a certain stage, sorry, I got to step away. It's just being safe. You start to make mistakes, and those mistakes turn into big errors, which A, cost you equipment, B, can cost your life. Working during storms. I had an AM/FM station I was at once for a short time. The AM was off one night. They took a pretty nasty lightning hit. I got into the station. FM was doing okay. The AM was off. And when my boss showed up, I was sitting at my desk with my feet up on the desk with a cup of coffee. Why are you not working on the transmitter? I said, there is a very severe thunderstorm going on right now. What is that transmitter hooked to? The biggest lightning rod sitting right outside the building. I'm not touching it until the storm passes. You know, it didn't make him happy, but it kept me alive. So, you know, during storms, wait for them to pass. I know it's money, time is commercial content, but is that more important in your life? Remember to use the power disconnects. And I brought this one up for a couple of different reasons, and it tags in with the lockout, tag out. One of the tricks I used to like to do at stations for like the backup transmitter, where they would keep the breaker pulled on it until they needed it. Well, I'd put little number stickers on what steps. You know, they had an instruction sheet to follow, but basically your 16-year-old kid that's working part-time on the weekend board op can run through and follow number 1, turn on breaker, number 2, push this button, number 3, push this button, wait 5 minutes. You know, they can follow that. Especially if it's a larger transmitter room, you're in the back behind the transmitter and you're working on it. They come in through the door, they don't know that you're in working on it, they don't know what you're doing, they say, oh, this is off, this should be back on. So that leads into the lockout, tag out. Make sure they use them. Make sure people know that you're in there. You know, or I want you to stay alive. Interlocks, that's one of my pet peeves. Anybody that's been in business for any length of time has bypassed an interlock. Sometimes it's to bypass it to do a test. Sometimes it's to bypass it to get back on the air. There's lots of reasons people will come up to bypass them. Folks are there for a reason, and there's a lot of dangers involved. If you do have to bypass an interlock to get it on the air, big letters or something, you may not be the next person going in to work on that unit. You know, don't leave a hidden danger for somebody else to find. It shouldn't be done, but I'm a realist. I understand there's going to be times where you have to. But end result, make sure to, if you do have to bypass one, make sure that it's in big letters somewhere so somebody else doesn't get hurt. Grounding sticks. I talked a little bit about them, but yeah, use a grounding stick. I was working on a transmitter one time with someone, and they wanted me to check, I don't remember what component it was, and I thought power was off the cabinet. I knew power was off to the main power supply. I thought power was off to the cabinet. And first thing I did was I took a grounding stick and hit the connection where I would need to take my meter reading, and this big fireball come blowing out at me. Then I hear, what the heck did you just do? Grounded the point, I'm glad I did. Well, I had power on. How did you expect to get the reading without power on? I said, staying alive. You know, but it happens, and it can happen when you're working with somebody, and even if somebody you trust. These things do happen, so use the grounding sticks. It's safety for you. It's safety for those around you. Emergency prevention. CPR, know it. First aid, know it. Older transmitter manuals had CPR instructions in the front of them. They had some basic first aid in front of them. Folks, you can get these classes for free, usually, through American Red Cross, through, lots of different sources, your local fire or EMS that's in your area. If you don't have a Red Cross chapter, talk to them. As far as I'm concerned, and I've done this at a couple stations I've been at, I got an instructor in to do a class. And everybody in the station was CPR certified. I actually brought the instructor to the station, so it wasn't like trying to get everybody to an offsite to do it. But I got the instructor into the station to do a CPR class. I got that same instructor in a few weeks later to do a first aid class. Everybody in the station was certified in both, except for one person that wasn't physically able to. It makes a difference, but it's something simple that you can do that does not cost money or cost very little money that can save a life. And I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here, staying safe. I don't want to read tomorrow in the paper where engineer dies working on transmitter. No. Stay safe, but you have the tools available. Go ahead and use them. Like I say, I've done that at a few radio stations, and it's actually gone over very well. Most of the people took it very positively. So, like I said, how to get certified in these classes, get a hold of your Red Cross, your local fire and EMS. If not, a local hospital could lead you the right direction. If you still have problems, call me, and I'll find one in your area for you, or I'll find somebody in your area for you. We talked about who should take these classes and be certified. First aid supplies. A lot of places, Transmitter Shack, the studio, whatever, has the first aid kit, the blue box mounted on the wall that we probably were the ones that mounted it for them. And nobody ever looks inside it. And nobody, or the time that you do need something out of it, they grab supplies out of it and then never replace it. Keep it fresh, keep it socked out, should be, and replace supplies as soon as they're used. That way, the next emergency that you need something for, maybe I cut my arm today working in the back of an FM transmitter and I got too near something. Well, tomorrow somebody was working on the AM transmitter because I hurt my arm yesterday and they got hurt doing something. But guess what? There's no supplies left in the cabinet. So as soon as it's used, replace it as soon as possible. It just helps. Any questions on transmitter safety? Like I say, I know it was kind of rudimentary for those of us that's been doing it for a while. And yes, sir.
Just as an example, it's always good to use your grounding stick. Three-phase transmitter, disconnect switch.
Mm-hmm.
Disconnect power. My business partner is also an engineer who's working on it. Kapow! The disconnect switch had broken apart.
Oh.
It didn't disconnect. He found out with the grounding stick. Said, oh, we better check that.
Yeah, that's a good thing, and that's a good example of why to make sure you use the grounding stick, because there can be mechanical failure in these switches. I had a station with a generator that it was an auto switch, auto everything, and I get a call from DJ one night and says, well, I asked the power company when we were going to get power back, and he said, you've had power back for 2 hours. Well, the board, the controller board had burned up in the generator controller. It knew that the primary feed was back on, but it didn't know to actually switch. And it was a Sunday night, and I called generator folks and got a hold of the on-call guy. I said, what do I do? He says, well, you're going to have to open up that 600 amp panel, and while it's live, you're going to have to do this and this. And I'm like, yeah. I was not a real happy camper on that one. But it was still done safely because I made sure not to remove any of the safety panels they had in place. Tried to do it, very methodically, made sure there was a second person there before I climbed in to do it. And it was a very big kapow when I did it. But, then generator people came out the next day and they fixed the controller and all was well. But once again, what you're saying, you can have failures in this equipment, even you think it's off and it's not really off. So that's a good point. Yes, sir.
We had an outside company service our first aid kits. They would come in monthly and replace whatever was needed and update everything, make costly, but it was very effective.
Centos, I know, does that.
Yeah, that's what-
There's one company. There's a couple of others out there depending on your area that you're in. But yeah, you can have that service, and if your station can afford it, that's a good service to have. It's one less thing on your plate to worry about. You've got somebody else worrying about taking care of that, so you got a little bit of a peace of mind. That's a good thing. Any other questions on safety part of it before we talk about the stuff that nobody likes to talk about, OSHA? Okay, emergency action plan, also EAP. What size facilities need an EAP? Every facility, every business needs an EAP. Per OSHA requirement, you're supposed to have one. If you're a 3-person operation, you're supposed to have one. If you're a business, you're supposed to have one. You're a 50-person operation, you're supposed to have one, and everybody in between. And there's different elements to it, which I'll get into here in a minute. So the next question is, well, can I just tell people? Does it have to be written? Per federal OSHA guidelines, if your place of employment has fewer than 10 people, it can be communicated orally. If there are more than 10 people, you're supposed to have a written policy, emergency action plan. How big, how small that is, we're going to talk about that, but that's per OSHA. The other thing with OSHA and trying to figure out what goes in the plan and what doesn't, another part of this that I learned about researching it out, federal OSHA made the guidelines. Well, your state OSHA agency can override the federal agency, not by doing away with pieces of it, but they can add to it. Your local OSHA office can't take away from it, but they can add to it also. So if you want to know what needs to be in your action plan, it can be different in every city and every state in the U.S., technically, because everybody could have their own set, but you need to try and work through local OSHA, if you have it, if not, state OSHA, to find out what you need to have in your plan. And that's one of the services we actually provide, not doing a commercial, but that's one of the services we do provide now is if you need help writing it, but if it doesn't make sense, we'll help you. We'll get you through it. Changes with the plan. Anybody guess how soon that needs to be communicated? Yep. If there's a change to your emergency action plan, you need to notify everybody immediately. If it's an oral, less than 10 people, yeah, you can go around and tell Jane and Fred and Hank and whoever. If it's more than 10, you make the written change, and then you go around and you show everybody and have them sign off. People that need to know it, new employee. As far as I'm concerned, this needs to be part of their onboarding. It's part of that process. You're doing their tax forms and all this other stuff, and their pre-employment screen, drug screen, and blah, blah, blah. All this fun stuff, make the emergency action plan part of it. Have it done right at that time before they even start. Then you're not worried about playing catch up. You're not worried about, I forgot to do Fred. No, you don't have to worry about it. If you make it part of your onboarding, then it's done. When to review? Anytime there's a change, it needs to be reviewed with everybody. Other than that, it's kind of up to you. OSHA's rule on this is a little loose, but I suggest yearly. I've had the suggestion of if your company has safety meetings, maybe cover a different piece of it in a safety meeting every time, just so it stays fresh in everybody's mind. And oh yeah, we've got one of those, I know what to do, or I know where to grab this if something happens. Quarterly would be great, to help keep it in people's minds if you don't have safety meetings. Like I said, OSHA's a little loose on that unless your local or state overrides it and says it's got to be done at this interval period in the story. But, I would suggest quarterly or half a year, or like I say, safety meetings, just do a section of it every time you have a safety meeting. With an emergency action plan, you're going to want to know where to find this stuff. And all of us that's been in engineering any length of time are familiar with the CFRs. And this one happens to be 1910.38, and it's a couple pages long, about sections about like that listed out. With the internet, you can look it all up online. You can actually pull up sample emergency action plans that's been done for some places to give you guidance. If you don't have one, you need to know how to write it. Things that have to be in there is a means of reporting emergencies, fires, medical emergency, what have you. That needs to be in the emergency action plan. What the evacuation route, what the evacuation procedures are. Maybe your station, you need to have somebody stay to do X or Y, you know, there's a critical position. Then they're going to stay behind for a certain amount of time. That needs to be in there. How are they to egress or evacuate when the emergency happens? What the procedures are for those employees that have to remain. I know that we're in a communication business. We're trying to get the word to people for safety. Let's say it's a tornado warning. Yeah, you want to stay on the air as long as you can, advising people what's going on, where's it going to hit next. But if it's coming right up your alley to your station where your people are, they've got to be safe too. So you have to have it designated, when is this critical person going to leave this situation? Additional items that need to be in the policy. There should be a detail of the company policy. It should be, you know, working with HR, working with whoever to make sure that the designated people you have are the right fit for the right position, all this fun stuff. Assignment of responsibility. In other words, who's going to be in charge of making sure that everybody got to the meeting place outside if the building's on fire? Who's going to do that head count? Who's going to be in charge of getting those numbers? And then who they're supposed to report that to. Maybe it's a larger TV station, maybe there's 50, 75 people. By the time you add all the news folks, it's a major market, and you add all the news folks, all the camera operators and everybody. So you may have 3 different people designated that's normally there. This in charge of counting this group, this one's in charge of counting this group, this one for this one. You know, maybe all 3 of them report back, but it just needs to be spelled out who's going to do what or be responsible for it. And then the emergency reporting, that one's kind of simple. If there's an emergency, somebody should be calling. Whoever's found the emergency, they should be calling. They shouldn't be going, well, I need to get a hold of Joyce, who's going to get a hold of Frank, who's going to get a... No. I've actually been around stations where somebody's been so laid back that our joke was with him that the building could be on fire and he'd be sitting there drinking his coffee going, maybe we should call the fire department. Well, maybe we should get outside then. Well, let's think about this. You know, people can be too calm. You know, that's not a good person necessarily to have a fit in this. Like I said, evacuation plans, they need to be posted. They should be posted in every room, just like what you saw when you was in school. You know, there was always an evacuation route. If I'm in room 201, I turn right out of the door, then turn left and hit this outside door or whatever. You should have those up in your place of business. Accountability, I talked about. Rescue or medical duties. You may have somebody on staff, you know, like myself, I'm still a licensed paramedic. So for our company, it'd be smart if somebody's having a medical emergency, hey, get John, see what's going on. Maybe he can help until we get 911 there. You may have that talent at your stations. You have a volunteer EMT, you have a guy that was a paid firefighter, you know, something like that. Ask, talk to the other folks. Find out if somebody does have these talents that can make your life a lot easier writing these plans. Critical operations, you have to decide what is critical and what isn't. So back to what I was talking about on how long does that critical person stay, when does that critical person say it's time for me to leave too? And when you get down to it, and I know there's new station owners that don't understand this, there's old station owners that don't understand this, Staying on the air is not necessarily the right thing to do. Sometimes you've got to look out for your people first, because if they're not here tomorrow, you're not going to have anybody to put anything on the air anyhow. So what's better, lose 2 hours here or lose the next 20 days? Plus the loss of life, possibly. So that's why it's important. Training, you should go over training with these folks on, once in a while on the evacuation route. Maybe there's something strange in the way a certain door works, but that's the best way for them to get egress. Make sure that they understand what's going on. There's a lot of people that sit there and go, yeah, okay, I got it. And they don't know anything of what you just said. There are people like that. So, do some training with them, do some spot training with them to make sure that they understand what it is they're reading and what they're supposed to do. You should have an emergency phone number list. And I'm not talking about 911 for emergencies. I'm talking about maybe you're supposed to call the president of your group. Maybe you're supposed to notify, maybe it's a multi-station group, and you're supposed to notify the regional market, brand manager, whatever, however your chain of command works, but have those phone numbers listed out and the people in your emergency action plan. And once again, if that changes, because we all know that nobody ever changes jobs in radio or television, but make sure that your EAP is updated and that change is reviewed with folks. What to do in case of fire. I was talking earlier about that guy I knew that would sit there wondering. In case of fire, to me, there is no such thing as a critical operation. Get out. Then call 911. The critical operation there is get out of the building. But maybe you could even have it spelled out to, if it's such a size, if it's a trash can burning that, you're supposed to grab a fire extinguisher from this location and try, whatever. Yeah, you can have things like that. But still, most everybody should be on their way out of the building immediately. What to do in case of natural disaster. That's going to be different on every region. You're on the East Coast, you're worrying about hurricanes. You're in Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, you're worried about tornadoes. You're out on the West Coast, you're worried about El Nino winds. There's different things in different parts of the country. It's just being aware of what's in your area, what you need to know about, and what you need to spell out in here. We talked a little bit about what to do in case of medical emergency. First off is call 911. Second off is if you have somebody that knows anything that can help, have that designated, or you have it designated that you're going to get this person here or there. Yeah.
5 minutes.
Okay. What to do with workplace violence. Now, when I did the run through on this, I was thinking of workplace violence as being between employees. And I was reminded, what business are we in? Well, you have a DJ that said something that somebody didn't like. The public shows up at your front door. You have a news anchor that said something that somebody didn't like. You have the public showing up at your front door. There's lots of different forms of violence, but once again, that should be in your EAP on how that's supposed to be handled. Off-site injury or vehicle accident. This happens to any of us that have a remote transmitter site or a secondary studio, or it's a multiple station group and you have a radio station 30 miles away and one that's 90 miles away, whatever, that you're driving to, taking care of all of them. The procedure needs to be, what are they supposed to do? Hopefully they're not hurt, but what they're supposed to do if they are in an accident. And my last part of this is stay safe. I'm a little passionate on safety because of my background, but I've seen more and more where we're trying to do more and more in this business with less and less people and less trained people. I want everybody to stay safe. I don't want people to take risks that are unnecessary and get hurt and get killed. Other than that, anybody got any questions about emergency action plan? Yes, sir.
More about the something you mentioned earlier, the transmitter safety. 20 years ago, I was part of a emergency response team at my office.
Okay.
They taught us, instead of lockout, tagout, lockout, blockout. And that is a physical barrier that locks the breaker. It's a key item that fits
Yep.
on your breaker. Is that something that's still recommended highly, or do people blow that off?
They recommend, it's still recommended if you have a locked way of doing it, that is the best way. I don't, personally, I would prefer to use a lock or some sort of a mechanical, more so than the plastic things that they try to give you for the breakers, just because it's more of a assurance for you. But if you have access to it, yeah, definitely. Yes, sir.
I'm currently working on a Continental transmitter.
Okay.
It was the first time we're gonna change it to, but tomorrow.
816R?
Oh, yeah. And I'm not sure if it's the 3B or the 2B. Anyway, I learned a lot yesterday. There's a control panel. Right? And they got the slotted cards.
Okay.
Element, control, blah, blah, blah. Well, they did have interlocks. And I was talking to the Continental guy, and I said, oh, there's interlocks in here. He said, well, they're usually bypassed. Now, wait a minute. In that situation, it's low voltage right there. And they work. So I'm sure you've run into circumstances where there's almost too much interlock.
There can be, but I'm going to tell you something that my father taught me when he was an engineer for years. I don't care if it's 110 volt, I don't care if it's 12 volt off of a car battery. If you get shocked, you know what you did wrong. Well, gee, I was a dummy. Even though you know it, something happens in your body, you will go back and do the same thing, even though you know it's wrong. His idea was you go out, sit on the stoop, wait 5 minutes, smoke a cigarette, whatever it is you do, wait, take a breath before you go back and do it. Even though you know what happened, muscle memory, whatever, makes you want to do it. Would you agree, Marvin? Yeah.
And here's the caveat to that. It was kind of odd because for this slot, they have an extension card to troubleshoot that, and they have two interlocks. And I was getting mixed messages. It's like, how are you supposed to diagnose those circuits?
Well, I'm assuming, and I've never actually worked on one of those in the controller area, but I'm assuming the extender card probably put the interlock in the right state.
I would hope so, but it looked like it just had the keys to the interlock were on the panel. And then you have to take it off, the extension card comes out, goes into the slot, and then your card's hanging out this far. I just got mixed signals on that.
Yeah, that's one that's going to have to be talked to the manufacturer to see about, unfortunately. Yes, sir.
When you talk about EAP for natural disasters,
Uh-huh.
I'm one of the emergency people from Home Shopping Network over in St. Pete, Florida.
Okay.
Dealing with hurricanes, we went through Ian, Irma, and Idalia pretty much, and every time we have to adjust the EAP so we can make a much smoother transition. But we always have to meet all the engineers and all the ones hired so that we can discuss EAP.
Good.
Every 6 months.
That's great. That's great. I mean, and fine tuning it after something happens, you find a way something can work. That's great. Anything else? All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful afternoon and stay safe.
Thank you very much, John. We appreciate all the wisdom that you've brought to us.